Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Well, listen, thank you all for grinding away with us. It's good to see all you guys. I'm here talking to Ben. Ben, first of all, let me just let you really quickly take it away for those unfamiliar. I just want to give you the floor to tell us a little bit about Change.org and what you guys do.
Yeah, so as mentioned before, Change.org, the world's largest petition platform. We have 50 million users around the world that are taking action by starting online campaigns. Sort of like the YouTube of online campaigns, everything from stopping acid attacks in India to saving schools in Thailand to changing policies around plastics in the United States. And 25,000 campaigns get launched every month, and more than a dozen win every day. So laws passed, policies changed, and lives touched. So it's been quite a ride.
So, I mean, considering this is the theme of this talk is social entrepreneurship, I also just want to ask you really quickly how, especially through the lens of Change.org, you define that, especially today.
Yeah, I mean, we have a fairly expansive perspective of what social entrepreneurship is. It's not sort of, I think there are a lot of people that want to narrow it down into something very specific, that you're addressing a particular charitable cause. We think in a much more expansive way, the kind of companies that are trying to solve some of the world's most important problems, and doing so through a variety of means, some of which are nonprofits, some of which are companies, but the orientation of the organization is mission-driven. So insofar as revenue is a huge part of what you do, it's in service of a broader vision of what might be possible in addressing either energy or education, or in our case, sort of democratization and people power.
So Ben, tell me a little bit too about what you see as the, I don't know if that's me scratching, but the kind of divide between nonprofits and for-profit startups, and I'm curious too how you think that for-profit startups and companies especially can encourage this kind of social entrepreneurship, this kind of social good, and do you see any changes today in the kind of the overall penetration of this way, you know, of looking at building companies compared to, let's say, 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I think the way we see it is, one is social entrepreneurship is a little bit about what you do in the world, and the second is how you do it. And so traditionally it's been seen as, you know, what objective do you have? I just mentioned kind of at its core, social entrepreneurship has been, are you addressing a major key social problem? And the second, though, is I think that's a fairly narrow perspective in the long term. We like to think of, while we hope to be many more companies that are focused on addressing major important social problems, that every company has significant impact on the lives of the staff, on the environment around them, on the community supporting them, and the customers that they have. And so we think there's sort of, from an expansive perspective, that increasingly, you know, every company is going to be seeing itself in some way as a social enterprise, as a company that impacts the lives of other people, even if it's not what you do in the product or service you provide, but how you do it in the business practices that you have. And that, I think, is actually a fairly sizable transformation. There's sort of a movement afoot called conscious capitalism. The idea underlying it is that, you know, capitalism at its roots, when done well with long-term perspective, you have an alignment between purpose and profit. Right? The most profitable way to run a business in the long-term perspective is actually respecting all the different stakeholders around the business, so your staff and your customers and whatnot. And I think that increasingly there's sort of a movement afoot for those types of businesses, regardless of the industry you're in.
Ben, if you had to give Silicon Valley a score, a report card right now, how would it be doing? I mean, right, we are so focused and so proud of the disruptive, you know, mentality here of our innovation. Yet at the same time, I think you look around at a lot of the problems that we have, say, in San Francisco, and it seems like there is a big divide between the tech industry, the bubble, and this kind of mentality that could potentially have a big impact.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, two things about this. One is sort of the companies that are started, and the second are the sort of behaviors and practices of all companies. As far as the companies that are started, I think, you know, we live at a time in which there's a certain class of people with a certain set of skills that have greater capacity to touch more lives than any class of people in all of history. And they're called like engineers, designers, to some extent entrepreneurs in tech. And it's an incredible outsized opportunity that we have. We just are fortunate to be at a time and a place where it is possible to literally dramatically shift the lives of tens of millions of people as individuals right now. In the 21st century, in Silicon Valley with these skills. And in the context of that enormous opportunity, it is striking to see what most people spend their time doing. And it is not availing themselves of that sizable opportunity in all cases. And without pointing fingers, there are certainly, I think that one of the great things about the Valley is that regardless of what people are doing, the way they're doing it is also innovative. But I will say that I would love nothing more than to see more entrepreneurs trying to aspire to maximize the impact they can have in this rather extraordinary time, looking at businesses that really matter. So that's on the sort of creation of new businesses, deciding whether it's going to be a photo sharing app or something that is more directly, significantly impacting people's lives. And the second, though, is, again, regardless of what you do, the way you respect and treat your community is immensely important. I think the Valley, and in San Francisco in particular, has done quite poor in this in a really striking way. I mean, we were talking a little bit before about how there's an increased angst and frustration amongst lots of native San Franciscans about the increased rents and the frustration about lack of jobs in San Francisco as dramatically different from what's happening in the startup community, which is coming with lots of money. And it is striking to me how little the startup community has done, that tech companies have done to be able to address this. And we have, I think, a fairly unique opportunity to not just sort of defend ourselves, but actually to lean in and help the city and sort of give back to the community of San Francisco to make things better for everybody. And that has not yet happened.
Absolutely. I think there's a huge opportunity, but I want to ask you, Ben, what do you think in terms of the finer points? What can these companies do to maximize this and really make a difference, right? It seems like too there's a big gulf between, let's say, the Googles of the world and the average 5-person young startup, right? I mean, we want to have it so that across the board that all these companies are invested in making a difference in their community, but how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would do if I ran Google, which is not a job that's available as I understand right now, but Larry might get tired, is there's a huge opportunity to use the unique assets of these tech companies to be able to add sort of fairly significant value in the lives of people in San Francisco, the primary of which is why not start vocational training for anyone in San Francisco or certain classes. Let's say you start with Mission High School around tech training. You could do technical training either around engineering and coding, you could do QA, things that are sort of more accessible potentially as well without a huge amount of background in tech. I think if you offered free courses and then the possibility of interviewing for jobs in the tech sector that may not be the most senior engineer, but actually might be in some way from the infrastructure side or on the technical support side of things, I think that there's no greater gift you can give somebody than a job when they don't have it. It is the thing that is primary in giving human dignity, a sense of purpose and self-worth, and an opportunity for improvement. And I think that one of the things that the Valley has done, we talk a lot about how we are job creators, which is generally not true. We're mostly job destroyers. And that's what you want to do if you're disrupting the industry. Your goal is not to have 400,000 people like GM or GE. You're trying to have 4,000 people like Facebook, but a higher market valuation. So you're actually trying to create new jobs, but largely that disrupt industries that reduce jobs at a much greater rate in other sectors. And I think thinking about how we can re-employ the people that are otherwise displaced is a real big opportunity. And sort of this idea of blue-collar engineers, sort of like having a huge number of engineers and technical sort of support people that could be trained by companies like Google or others in the Valley in general, and San Francisco specifically, is a real opportunity.
Are there any programs in particular that you're aware of for engineers to recruit them into organizations that may not necessarily be, Facebook or the Googles of the world, but are making a social impact? Again, these companies may not be able to offer the same kind of incentives or perks, but are there other things that we can do or the community at large can do to incentivize them to come work for these companies?
Yeah. One of the challenges that social enterprises have, nonprofits in particular, but also social enterprises, is a recruiting pipeline. So if you are a graduate from Stanford out of CS and you want to go into a startup community, there are huge numbers of people recruiting from Facebook and from Google and whatnot, sizable resources. But if you're a new energy startup or education startup, it is much more difficult to get that pipeline and traction. And so you end up, I think, just by virtue of the ease of joining a larger company, because the resources they have to recruit, you end up getting a lot of top quality engineers that might be amenable to, that are interested in social impact businesses that just don't find them. We think this is a really big problem. It's a challenge for us. We're trying to hire like dozens of engineers right now. And one of the challenges is sort of recruiting. And so we're going to be doing a lot more at universities in the future to try to evangelize the idea of engineering for change, not just change.org, but in general in this sector, but for us as well. And I think there's a real opportunity. You know, the CEO of Goldman Sachs recently said, the biggest competitor for talent of Goldman Sachs is Teach for America. Because 19% of Stanford graduates apply to Teach for America. It's about 18 to 19% of most Ivy League schools. It is the most applied to job of any job in any industry at all top universities. And I think there's an equal opportunity to leverage. I mean, this didn't happen 20 years ago. People weren't applying to teaching jobs out of these schools. And it's changed because the brand, because the accessibility, because the sense of movement. I think that there's a similar opportunity in engineering.
Ben, I also want to ask you I think that young people have the reputation, right, is when we're talking about these, these businesses that are making a social impact, that young people might be more, willing or inclined to go work for them. Is it your sense that this is actually true? Judging by, again, what we've talked about, the kind of perspective in San Francisco, I was talking to a digital health entrepreneur recently who said, for example, that he was having, a significant difficulty recruiting top-notch engineers from other health tech companies. Again, as we talked about, this may be fundamentally a recruiting problem or an image issue. But it does seem like, again, we're still losing a lot of the top talent to perhaps more ad-focused businesses rather than those that are making a real social impact.
Yep.
Is it that your sense that this is true among younger people?
I think there's an enormous appetite, enormous amount of interest and excitement among younger people for getting involved in meaningful work, broadly defined. I think, again, there's just, if you make it, the more difficult you make it, the less likely it's going to happen. This is sort of the foundation of the consumer internet. Make it as easy as possible, and you reduce friction, and therefore increase throughput. We need the same in the recruiting pipeline of people focused on impact ventures. And so I think it's just right now, it's not easy. I had given a talk to all the incoming freshmen at Stanford who were sort of, came for 3 days and, talked amongst each other about whether they wanted to go to school there. And I got a question at the end of it, and it was a young woman who said, I've had, a great 3 days. It's been incredibly inspiring. I'm meeting all these people that want to go change the world. And my question to you is, are you worried that in the future, people aren't going to want to work normal jobs? There won't be enough people to work jobs that are not meaningful, which I thought was cute. But hopefully true in the future as well. And I think that we are at a time in which, as your friends and as your community increasingly works in purpose-driven businesses and companies that give you a sense of deep meaning, it becomes increasingly difficult for other companies that don't offer that to recruit as well. And we're in the very early stages of this, but I think the interest that people have fundamentally is significant. And so now we need to find a better pathway to recruit them into the sector.
And are those people, do you find, still willing to take perhaps a slightly reduced salary for those added social benefits that they're getting?
You see this happening right now around Teach for America, around the Peace Corps, around AmeriCorps. I mean, people are certainly willing to, at least in some small way, make sacrifices for the purpose of enjoying their job. I would say, it's funny. Yeah, people sometimes will say, oh God, you do this charity work all the time, or all this sort of social good work, it's sort of a sacrifice. It's like a gift to be able to wake up every single day and do the work you think is the most important work you could ever possibly do. And if the best definition of, I think, the way in which I want to direct my life in large ways that you see, I call the grandfather test for me, which is when you're a grandfather, talking to your grandkids, looking back at the arc of your life, what do you want to be able to tell them about the decisions that you made, about the work that you did? And not a lot of people want to say, well, I picked a job that didn't have a lot of meaning because they paid me $10,000 more. It's kind of depressing. And they don't want to say it because they're embarrassed about it. They don't want to say it because it's not what they wish they had done. And so I think that insofar as you provide, we pay basically market rate, maybe slightly small. Not a lot of people pay as much as Google, but pretty close. And the equity opportunities may be slightly different. We're not going to sell the company or go public. It will be a long-term, private, profitable enterprise. But to optimize on the thing that is clearly not the most important to you when you're asked when you're older. I think there's a real lack of recognition sometimes of long-term perspective, and optimizing for income at the expense of your own happiness seems to be ironic when largely you care about income because you want to be happy.
And I now may sound hypocritical, having almost advocated for those to take slightly lesser salaries to do some good in the world. But Ben, Do you see that there are real billion-dollar opportunities at the same time among businesses that are actually doing well and doing good in the world?
Oh, completely. And this is why, I mentioned it's not as if there's sort of some massive sacrifice. There are absolutely, if you look at, I think the three broad industries that are big umbrella opportunities for massive scaled social impact, energy, education, healthcare. I mean, these are massive trillion-dollar industries, right? Energy, $2 trillion, education, about $750 billion, and in healthcare, $2.5 trillion. These are huge industries ripe for disruption, and the success of which would be enormously valuable for the rest of the world and could provide significant resources for those investors and founders as well. And so I don't think that it is totally possible if you pick the right industry and the right business to have a coming together. We think of sort of purpose and profit. I think if you look in the long term, if you want to run one of these companies in those industries, there is a really happy coincidence between the two. The more effective you are at impacting people's lives, the more revenue you generate because the scale you hit, the more capable you are of impacting people's lives. And that virtuous circle is a fairly new thing, but it's very real. And when done well with a long-term perspective, that is the most exciting thing I think happening in social enterprise.
So when we talk about that need for a long-term perspective, I mean, this seems especially true among investors, right? And those institutions that are investing in these types of businesses. Do you think that really it's more of an education issue in educating investors to the opportunities here, or is it more that we need to create a whole different asset class, say, to give some of these companies the opportunity to receive investment, to grow, and to have the same kind of opportunities that a for-profit business might traditionally have?
So my perspective, there's two almost separate asset classes that need to exist that don't really right now to address this broad opportunity. The first is sort of this idea of impact investment. So you've got a lot of guys, a lot of people that are making billions of dollars, and they're giving a lot of away to charity, to nonprofits, in service of a broader mission. But it's oftentimes the case that investing in for-profit social enterprises that are addressing similar problems are a much better, more scalable way to address that. And so it's crazy that the idea that you're going to go donate $1 million to address an education issue where you could invest $1 million in a for-profit education institution that has actually more impact with additional financial returns over the long term. Literally, people will make the donation a lot of times. It is crazy, and it's just by virtue of it's a psychological shift that needs to happen, in the sense that there's sort of this opportunity to achieve the objectives you have from a mission-driven perspective with for-profit financial investments. So that needs, I think, absolutely to happen. The second, though, as well, is you have this challenge now with even if you're convinced that this mission-driven enterprise is as sizable a financial opportunity as any other. Let's say, for us, I mean, we're one of the fastest-growing social change organizations in the world, but one of the fastest-growing internet companies in the world. We could easily go to a VC, raise tens of millions of dollars, and talk about sort of why we wanted to go public. Now, we don't want to go public. We don't want to sell because we think that's not going to serve the ultimate mission. But we do think it's a financial, rational investment for people. But from venture capital firms' perspective, if you want a liquidity event within 5 to 7 years to get out your money, you have to have a sale or go public. And we think that's crazy because most businesses historically have made money through things like profit sharing and dividends and whatnot over the long term. And so I think there needs to be a new asset class that enables you to remain independent as a company, to keep control of your business, to focus on the long term, to build huge value that is financially in the interest of everybody, but is framed in a different than a 5 to 7 year time horizon that VCs have. And the absence of that is a real pain point, I think, and a real opportunity in the future as well.
Ben, I know you guys just raised $10 million for Change.org. I'm curious, maybe some people would benefit from this too. Can you tell us who some of your investors were and some of the investors and institutions that you say who are already moving into the space, who are making big bets and do have this kind of long-term focus?
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of them. And so we raised last year, at some point actually, $15 million from the Omidyar Network, who was the sort of lead anchor investor. So Pierre Omidyar, founder of eBay, has a sort of large investment fund that funds both the nonprofits and for-profits, and is deeply committed to this idea that business in a for-profit capacity can be an enormous source of social good in a scaled way. So Omidyar Network is an outstanding organization. And frankly, beyond that, there's not a whole lot of others. There's a group called Uprising now that is focused on this, of mission-driven investment in for-profit businesses that have the potential for massive scale, where you're not giving up financial returns for impact, but you realize impact-driven businesses have a great long-term time horizon. But frankly, one of the biggest challenges is there just aren't a lot of folks in this space. And what we're trying to do, besides achieve the mission of democratizing democracy and people power around the world with 50 million and soon 100 million users, our goal is to demonstrate that it's possible to build a mission-driven business in the tech sector that scales enormously, that is financially successful and sustainable. And the success of that, I think, we hope, will encourage more investors on the earlier stage side of things to bet on impact-driven businesses, because we show, among others as well, Kickstarter has done this in a sort of a vaguely similar way. I think that we can show that it's really possible.
Ben, we have to wrap up, but I wanted to just say, are there any other things for entrepreneurs, for startups in the room, and for those listening, following along at home, are there any particular lessons that you haven't touched on that you guys used at change.org to kind of establish this mission-driven approach to whether it's recruiting, to growing a big business and doing all these things that we've already touched on?
Yeah, I think the biggest question I get from social entrepreneurs in particular is, should I give up? I've been at this for 6 months. I'm not sure there's a real business here. Can I raise money? And by far the most important determinant of our success was relentless determination for 4 years to do everything necessary to succeed. And the thing I sort of oftentimes will tell people, actually, is a Tim O'Reilly quote. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but Tim talks a little bit about how, pick a problem that is so important that even your failure will feel like a success, right? Even failing at something is a problem so worth your time that you would have moved the world forward. And that's my challenge to entrepreneurs. Doing something that if you failed you wouldn't be proud of is not worth your time. There are too many things to do in the world.
Well, thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks so much.